My wife tried to empty my accounts behind my back. She had no idea I'd saved every document. I'm an engineer who builds things meant to hold under pressure. I never thought I'd need that same skill to survive my own marriage. While she was secretly moving our money to a stranger, I was secretly building a case against her, and she never saw it coming until it was already finished. Viewers, before you continue, please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories. My name is Barkley Nelson, and I am 38 years old, a structural engineer living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I spend my days making sure bridges and parking decks don't fall down, the kind of work where one missed calculation means somebody gets hurt, so I have trained myself to notice small things before they become catastrophes. I carry that same instinct home with me every night, into the brick 4-bedroom house in Myers Park that my wife Mandy Barkley and I bought 6 years ago, the house with the porch swing and the mortgage that still makes my stomach tighten every first of the month. I married Mandy 8 years ago believing we were building something together, the way I build everything else, with careful math and no shortcuts. I thought ours meant ours. I want you to understand that before I tell you what happened, because this isn't a story about a man who went looking for trouble. Trouble found me at 11:47 on a rainy Tuesday night, while Mandy slept upstairs and I sat alone in my home office with my laptop's blue light washing over my face. A fraud alert buzzed against my phone, the kind of notification you swipe away half asleep most nights, except this one had a number attached to it that made my whole body go still. Unusual activity, it said, on a joint account ending in 4421. I told myself it was nothing. A glitch. A subscription I'd forgotten about. I have built my entire career on trusting numbers more than feelings, and that night, the numbers were screaming at me to look closer, even while every other part of me wanted to close the laptop and go to bed beside the woman I loved. I didn't close it. I opened the banking app instead, and somewhere in that small, ordinary decision, the next 11 weeks of my life began to unravel, one transfer, one lie, one buried secret at a time. I had no idea yet how far this would go, or how much of it I would end up documenting with my own hands. The fraud alert led me to a transfer of $4,200, moved 3 days earlier to an account I had never seen, and my hands went cold before my brain even caught up with what I was looking at. I clicked into the transaction details, half expecting a clerical error, some glitch the bank would apologize for in the morning. Instead I found a recipient name that meant nothing to me, Coastline Equity Holdings LLC. Not a person. A company. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of sitting together at this same kitchen table doing taxes and budgets side by side, and I had never once heard that name pass her lips. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe her sister needed money and Mandy was too proud to ask me directly. Maybe it was a scam she hadn't told me about yet because she was embarrassed, the way good, careful people sometimes are when they fall for something slick. I wanted that explanation so badly I almost talked myself into believing it before I'd even finished reading the screen. Then a memory surfaced, one I had filed away without thinking twice about it at the time. 2 months earlier, over wine on this same porch, Mandy had mentioned an old college friend who'd gotten into real estate investing, and when I asked, casually, who she meant, she had laughed it off and changed the subject so smoothly I hadn't even noticed the redirect until now, replaying it in the dark. I sat with my coffee growing cold beside the laptop, scrolling back through months of statements I had never thought to question, because why would I question them? She was my wife. Upstairs I could hear the floorboard near our bedroom door creak, the one that always groans when she gets up for water in the night, and I closed the laptop fast, heart hammering, like a man caught somewhere he didn't belong in his own home. I didn't sleep. I lay beside her listening to her breathe, slow and even and untroubled, and I wondered, for the first time in 8 years, whether I actually knew the woman next to me at all. The next morning I did what I do at work whenever a structure doesn't add up. I went looking for the load-bearing problem, the one weak point holding up a lie too heavy for it. I didn't confront her at breakfast. I poured coffee with hands that felt steadier than I expected while Mandy hummed some pop song from the radio, completely unaware that I had spent the night cataloging every transfer out of our joint account going back 4 months. I am an engineer. If I am ever going to make an accusation, it has to hold weight, every number checked twice, every date cross-referenced, because half-built cases collapse and take the builder down with them. So I created a folder on my laptop, password protected, backed up to a drive I kept in my truck's glove compartment where she would never think to look. Screenshots. Statements. Timestamps lined up like rebar before the concrete pour. That afternoon, during a lunch break I should have spent eating, I drove to the post office near her office to renew our box rental, and on a whim asked the clerk to check if we had any other accounts registered to our address. We didn't. But a UPS store 3 miles away had one registered to M. Barkley that I had never opened, never been told about, never signed for. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long time before I worked up the nerve to go back the following week and ask about the account's history. It had been opened 4 months before our wedding anniversary trip to Savannah, the trip Mandy had insisted on planning entirely by herself, down to every dinner reservation, every detail, my treat, she told me, smiling in a way that now felt less like generosity and more like cover. I drove home that evening rehearsing casual questions I never asked, and somewhere underneath the fear, a colder, more methodical part of me had already started building a case I prayed I wouldn't need. I let my mind drift back to Savannah that night, replaying it the way you replay a structural failure afterward, looking for the moment the load shifted. Golden light over the river, Mandy laughing on the hotel balcony, her phone always face down on the table between us like it was guarding something. At the time I thought nothing of it. Now I remembered 3 separate evenings when she stepped out for a walk, gone 40 minutes, sometimes longer, returning with her hair slightly damp and a scent on her that wasn't ours, which she explained away as the hotel's lobby diffuser, some cedarwood thing they pump through the air vents. I believed her, because the alternative was unthinkable, because believing her cost me nothing and doubting her felt like a betrayal of its own. That trip, I would learn weeks later, had been paid for in part by $1,800 quietly skimmed from our kitchen renovation escrow, money I had assumed was sitting untouched, waiting for contractors who kept pushing back their start date. I opened that account the night I made the connection, dread pooling low in my stomach before I even saw the number, and it wasn't untouched at all. It was nearly half empty, withdrawals dated weeks apart, small enough that I had never noticed them disappearing one at a time, the way a beam doesn't groan until it's already failed. I sat at my desk with the renovation quote still open in another tab, contractor names and material costs I had memorized like scripture, and felt something in my chest go quiet and hard. This wasn't an accident, a one-time lapse, a moment of weakness. This was a pattern, sustained, patient, deliberate, stretching back further than I wanted to admit. I thought about the version of myself who had stood on that Savannah balcony, certain he had everything, and I wondered how long he'd actually been the only one who believed it. It took 6 days of careful digging to find the man behind Coastline Equity Holdings. Public LLC filings, a reverse address lookup, one unexpectedly useful real estate license database I used for work, and there he was, Tobias Reyes, 41, divorced, a self-described property consultant with a trail of LLCs registered and dissolved across 3 states. Buried in an online forum for small claims disputes, I found 2 other women, in 2 other cities, describing investments with him that had simply evaporated, their complaints written in the same exhausted, disbelieving tone I recognized from my own throat when I read them aloud to an empty office. I sat outside his building in Charlotte one night, engine off, watching a lit window on the 3rd floor, doing nothing at all, just trying to decide whether I was about to become a man who does something he can't undo. I thought about the years I'd spent designing things meant to hold steady under pressure, and how strange it felt to have no blueprint for this. As I finally pulled away from the curb, headlights swept the street behind me, and in my mirror I watched a familiar sedan turn onto that same block, 2 streets down from where I'd been parked. My stomach dropped before my mind even confirmed what I already suspected. I told myself it could be a coincidence, that Charlotte wasn't so large a city that 2 cars sharing a few blocks meant anything. But I had spent 8 years learning the particular way Mandy idled at a stop sign, the slight hesitation before she accelerated, and I knew that car. I drove 3 blocks, parked again, and watched in my rearview mirror as she pulled into a lot half a block from Reyes's office, cutting her headlights before she'd even fully stopped. I didn't follow her in. I just sat there, hands on the wheel, feeling the last fragile edge of doubt give way entirely. I almost told her everything that night. The folder was open upstairs on my laptop, every transfer documented, every date lined up with the precision I bring to a blueprint review. Instead I found her in the kitchen, back to me, knife working steadily through vegetables for dinner, and I asked, as casually as I could manage, whether she was still in touch with that old college friend, the real estate one. The knife stopped. Just for a beat. Then resumed, a fraction faster than before. "Why do you ask?" she said, too light, too quick, the kind of voice people use when they're buying themselves a second to think. I told her no reason, just curious, and watched her shoulders ease back down, certain the moment had passed her by unnoticed. It hadn't passed me by at all. Weeks later I would learn the fuller truth of how she'd met Tobias Reyes, not through college at all, but through a financial wellness seminar she'd attended alone 8 months earlier, in the same stretch of time she had quietly miscarried a pregnancy she never told me she was carrying, let alone losing, processing that grief with a stranger who flattered her instead of a husband who would have held her through it. That detail, when it finally surfaced, broke something in me more thoroughly than any bank statement had. She hadn't only hidden an affair or hidden money. She had hidden grief, handed it to someone else entirely, as if I hadn't earned the right to carry it with her. That night, though, I knew none of that yet. I only knew the knife had stopped, and that something in her voice had flinched. After she went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table and quietly moved $30,000 of our remaining liquid savings into a private account she had no access to, my hands steady, my chest anything but, building a wall around what little I had left to protect. I came home on a Thursday to find divorce paperwork sitting on the kitchen island, not from a lawyer, just a downloaded template, half filled in, the kind people file when they want a quiet, fast exit and don't want anyone looking too closely at what's underneath. Beside it sat a note in Mandy's handwriting: "We need to talk tonight. I think we both know things have changed." I stood there for a long time before I even picked it up, feeling something cold settle where the panic used to live. Not rage yet. Something quieter and more dangerous. I thought about every quiet withdrawal, every Savannah evening, every flinch at the kitchen counter, and realized she wasn't preparing to confess. She was preparing to leave before I could catch her, the paperwork itself a kind of insurance. Later, through messages I would eventually see in full, I learned Tobias had been pushing her hard in the weeks prior, urging her to liquidate what jointly owned assets she could reach, before things get messy, his words, recovered and saved like everything else. He had never loved her. He was 3 transfers away from his 4th set of victims, and she had simply been the most convenient. I sat with the paperwork in my hands for an hour, the house silent around me, the porch swing creaking faintly outside in the wind, and felt the last of my disbelief finally give way to something closer to clarity. When Mandy walked through the door that evening, she wasn't alone. Her sister stood just behind her in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes already wary, as if she'd come along expecting a fight she didn't fully understand. I looked past Mandy to her sister first, and something in that small detail told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation had been rehearsed on the drive over, and how little of the truth either of them actually planned to bring inside with them. "I know about the transfers," I said, before either of them had even set down their bags. "I know about Coastline. I know about Tobias." Mandy's face did something I had never seen in 8 years of marriage, not guilt exactly, but calculation, the look of someone quickly running numbers on how much damage had already been done. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "Then what is it?" I asked, because I have 11 weeks of bank statements that say otherwise. Her sister went very still in the doorway, watching us both like she was witnessing something she hadn't been warned about. Mandy's hands trembled now, though her voice held. "I was going to pay it back. I was going to fix everything before you noticed." I felt something in my chest crack open, not from surprise but from how small the excuse sounded next to the size of what she'd done. You didn't move money to fix anything, I told her. You moved it to leave. The silence after that was the loudest sound in the house. I thought of Savannah, of the kitchen escrow, of the UPS box rented months before our anniversary, of the financial seminar and the grief she'd carried somewhere I wasn't allowed to follow. All of it arranged itself suddenly into a single, coherent shape, a structure I could finally see in full, every weak point now accounted for. Mandy opened her mouth to answer and closed it again, as if she'd rehearsed a dozen versions of this moment in the car and none of them fit anymore. Her sister shifted her weight, glancing between us, clearly realizing this conversation went deeper than anything she'd been told to expect. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply turned, walked to the next room, and came back carrying my laptop, because I had spent 11 weeks building a case the same way I build everything else, carefully, quietly, and to hold. I set the laptop on the coffee table between us and turned the screen toward her, the blue light washing over both our faces in the dim room. Every transfer was there. Every UPS store receipt. Every LLC filing bearing Tobias Reyes's name, including the 2 prior complaints from women in other states who had trusted him the same way Mandy had. I scrolled to a screenshot of a message thread where he'd urged her to move quickly, before her husband started asking questions, his exact words preserved in a font too plain for how much damage they'd caused. I documented everything, I told her. Every dollar, every date. My lawyer already has copies. She went pale in a way I had never seen, not from being caught, I realized, but from understanding all at once that I had known for weeks and let her keep walking toward the edge of her own choices without warning her. You let me, she started, voice catching. I let you show me who you really were, I said. I didn't make you do any of it. For a moment neither of us spoke, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room, absurdly ordinary against the size of what was happening. Her sister finally broke the silence, looking at Mandy with an expression caught somewhere between confusion and dawning horror. Mandy, she said slowly, what is he talking about, other states? Mandy didn't answer. She just stared at the screen, at her own signature on transfer after transfer, at a stranger's name attached to money that had once belonged to both of us, and I watched 8 years of careful, constructed trust finish collapsing in real time, the way a structure finally gives after the load has shifted too many times to bear. The divorce wasn't quiet in the end, though I had once hoped it might be. The documentation I'd kept didn't only protect my share of what remained between us in court, it became part of a larger fraud case against Tobias Reyes. Once the 2 other women came forward and prosecutors connected the pattern across state lines. Mandy was never charged. In the end she was just one more person he had used carefully and discarded, and that truth didn't make what she'd done to me forgivable, it only made the whole thing sadder than I expected anger to feel once it finally burned itself out. I think about the miscarriage sometimes, about the version of this story where she told me instead of him, where grief brought us closer instead of splitting us apart in secret. I will probably never fully know why she chose silence. What I do know is that I spend my days making sure structures hold weight without anyone noticing the careful work underneath, and I gave my marriage the same kind of attention far too late to save anything but myself. Now I sit most mornings on the porch of a smaller, sunlit apartment a few miles from Myers Park, coffee in hand, the folder still saved on a drive in a drawer nearby, not out of bitterness anymore, just habit. Engineers keep their calculations even after the bridge is gone. Last month, a woman from Nashville reached out to me online, describing an investment opportunity that sounded uncomfortably familiar, a consultant, an LLC, a pattern of urgency dressed up as opportunity. Tobias Reyes is still out there, and Charlotte was never his first city. I don't know yet whether I'll get involved again, whether documenting one more man's pattern is mine to carry. But I kept every file from this story for a reason, and some part of me suspects I'm not finished using them. Please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories.